Title of the first section is Determine. Type of graph. Without factoring. First equation is y squared minus 2x squared minus 4x minus 4y minus 4 equals 0. This equation is not in standard form for any of the graphs, but without factoring it or without solving it, we can determine the type of graph. We want to look at the variables that are squared. We have y squared and negative 2x squared. So both variables are squared, so it's not a parabola. We have a positive y squared and a negative x squared. There's one graph that has one variable positive and one variable negative, and that graph would be a hyperbola. So by looking at the equation, we can determine that this graph would be a hyperbola shape. Second equation we'll look at, and last equation for the section. 4x squared plus 4y squared plus 20x minus 12y plus 30 equals 0. And again, by looking at the equation, we can tell what type of graph this would be. Looking just at the variables that are squared, we have 4x squared and 4y squared. Both of them are the same signs and same coefficients. If both have the same coefficients and are both positive, this graph would be a circle. Title of the next section is Write an Equation. In standard form. One definition for the section is complete the square. To complete the square, we will add the fraction b over 2 squared to both sides. This will enable us to factor by completing the square and get the equation in standard form. First equation we'll look at is y equals x squared plus 6x plus 1. By looking at the equation, we can tell what shape it is. It has a single variable squared, so a single variable squared means this will be a parabola shape. This is good to know, so we know our final answer should be in standard form for a parabola. To complete the square, we'll bring down the x squared plus 6x, and to factor this, we'll have to add a number to make it a perfect square trinomial that we can factor, and that number will be b over 2 squared. The plus 1 we have above will come down, and the y will come down also. To find b over 2 squared, we'll take the value b, divide by 2, which would be 3, and square that, which would be 9. So we'll add 9, so this becomes a factorable trinomial. Since we add 9 to one side though, we'll have to add 9 to the other side. Bringing down the question, we have 9 plus y equals factoring x squared plus 6x plus 9. That would factor to x plus 3 and x plus 3, or we can write it as x plus 3 squared. And the plus 1 comes down. Last step to put this in standard form for a parabola is to get y by itself. So we can subtract 9 on both sides. And our final answer would be y equals x plus 3 squared minus 8. And that would be the equation in standard form for the parabola. Second question, and last question for this section, is x squared plus 4y squared plus 2x minus 24y plus 33 equals 0. To factor this one again, we want to complete the square. X squared would come down, and we want to bring the x's next to it so we can factor the x's together. And when we complete the square, we'll add a number in just a minute so we can factor that. The 4y squared will come down, and we'll put the minus 24 after that, 24y. And again, we'll add a number to the y value so we can factor that in just a minute. For the plus 33, what we can do is we can move that to the other side by subtracting 33. So it'll be equal to negative 33. When we're factoring both x and y, any other number we want on the other side. To factor this, we can complete the square on the x's. b divided by 2, or 2 divided by 2 would be 1. Squaring that would be a positive 1. So we'd have x squared plus 2x plus 1. But since we added 1 to the left side, we'll have to add 1 to the right side also. Factoring the x's, x squared plus 2x plus 1. That would factor to x plus 1 squared. Before we factor the y values, one other step in completing the square is the variable squared has to have a single 1 as a coefficient. Right now it has a positive 4. So what we can do is actually factor out a positive 4 from that y squared. And we can also factor out a 4 from the negative 24. So that would be negative 6y. And again, we'll still have that number that we'll find in just a minute. And it's equal to negative 33 plus 1 would be negative 32. If we complete the square on the y value, negative 6 divided by 2 would be negative 3. Squaring that would be 9. So we're adding 9 to the y so we can factor. There's a 4 outside the parentheses though, so instead of adding 9, we're actually adding 36. So if we add 36 to one side, we'll add 36 to the other side. Completing the question, x plus 1 squared would come down. The 4 would also come down. Y squared minus 6y plus 9 we can factor. That would factor to y minus 3 squared equals. And negative 32 plus 36 would be positive 4. Looking at the equation, we can tell what shape it might be. X squared and y squared would be positive. So what we want to do is have the equation equal to 1. To make this equal to 1, we can divide by 4, which would also cancel out the 4 in front of the parentheses. So our final answer, we'll have x plus 1 squared over 4, plus these 4's would cancel. So we'll have y minus 3 squared and equals 1. Looking at this equation, this would be the standard form for an ellipse. So this would be the answer to the factored equation, which would be a standard form for an ellipse.